I love 1990s horror, but maybe not for the same reasons everyone else does, and this is probably the only top 10 list of that decade that doesn't include Scream. Welcome to the Cinema Cult. I'm CT, and I've been celebrating halfway to Halloween this month by getting a little more personal and looking back through the decades with my sometimes questionable tastes to choose my favorite horror movie from each year, plus a whole slew of honorable mentions that didn't quite make the cut. Now, last time I tackled the 2000s, but today it's all about the 1990s, so we're going to start off with 1990, and it was a strong year for horror no matter what you're into. Stephen King fans got Misery and Graveyard Shift, and any serious horror fan needs to check out Jacob's Ladder and Exorcist 3. But for me, 1990 was all about the horror comedies, and it was tough to choose just one. Runners-up include Arachnophobia, Frankenhooker, and Gremlins 2, but none of them could compete with the nostalgic love I have for one of my original favorite creature features, Tremors. Tremors is a movie that's been a constant favorite of mine ever since I was a kid, and the funny thing is, I don't think I ever even had to rent this one back in the day because it was replayed on TV so often after bombing in theaters in 1990. But ultimately, Tremors was always destined to find its audience because this movie, set in Perfection, Nevada, is basically a perfect creature feature film. Now, I absolutely love the cast here. Kevin Bacon and Fred Ward as the two leads really do feel like a couple of guys who've been best friends for years, trying to make their way through life however they can. And now that they're finally going to leave this dead-end town, they find out they can't, because the only way out of this valley's been cut off by underground creatures called graboids. And these massive worm-like monstrosities hunt by detecting vibrations through the ground and ensnare their victims with a mouthful of snakish tongues that have little mouths of their own. These things are fast as hell too, so you can't outrun them. Your only hope is to get up high and stay there as long as possible. Hopefully they'll get distracted and find another meal. Now, Tremors also features an all-time great creature feature scene when one of these graboids bursts through the Gummer's basement, only to find this couple of preppers armed with their own personal arsenal and ready to take on just about anything that moves.
Broke into the wrong goddamn rec room, didn't you, you bastard?
Moving on to 1991, and there's a lot of late entries into existing franchises, and I do mean a lot. Child's Play 3, Critters 3, Puppet Master 3, The Omen 4, Silent Night, Deadly Night 5, Freddy's Dead: The Final Nightmare, which of course was not the Final Nightmare movie at all. Really though, there's only one choice for this year, and it's not a sequel, it's Silence of the Lambs. Right off the bat, I know a lot of folks say Silence of the Lambs is a thriller and not a horror film, but hey, Letterboxd puts this movie in both the thriller and horror genres, so I'm counting it. Although, I do think this movie deserves consideration as an extremely dark comedy. Hear me out, every good comedy has the perfect straight man, or in this case woman, as FBI trainee Clarice Starling is given an opportunity to help on the Buffalo Bill serial killer case by interviewing the infamous Dr. Hannibal Lecter, hoping to gain his insights on this new killer. Now, Clarice is just trying to do a good job and get ahead at the FBI, but she's mostly surrounded by weirdos and idiots who'd rather hit on her than provide assistance. And then you've got this film's two serial killers, Buffalo Bill and Hannibal the Cannibal, each competing to chew up the most scenery and the least amount of screen time. And Hannibal definitely gets most of the best lines in this movie, not to mention the ridiculous way he's transported around strapped to a hand truck with that hilarious half mask, and the giant human cage he's sequestered in after promising to help find the senator's kidnapped daughter. Buffalo Bill isn't gonna let his limited screen time hold him back though, and he brings it with a dancing scene that features a full-on mangina. And this movie may not have blood and guts, but apparently this is what the Academy considers prestige horror. Now I just think this is a seriously entertaining serial killer movie that's got some genuinely tense moments, especially in that final act.
It rubs the lotion on its skin or else it gets the hose again.
Moving on to 1992, and it's a lot like 1990 with a lot of horror comedies or less than serious horror movies coming out. I'm talking about releases like Army of Darkness, Brain Dead, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Death Becomes Her, Demonic Toys, and Dr. Giggles. But it wasn't all fun and games. The horror classic Candyman was also released this year, but I gotta go with David Lynch's devastating Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me for my choice. David Lynch isn't exactly known for making easy to follow films, and while Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me is a prequel to the Twin Peaks TV series, if you watch this movie without having seen the first 2 seasons of that show, you're likely to find yourself more confused than horrified.
Do you know who I am?
Now, I'm a big Twin Peaks fan, so I would just recommend watching those first 2 seasons, then this movie, and then checking out the insanity that is Season 3, Twin Peaks The Return. Anyway, I'm going to keep this high level for those of you who aren't familiar with this universe. Now, the TV show begins with the discovery of homecoming queen Laura Palmer's body wrapped in plastic. And the majority of this movie covers the last 7 days of Laura Palmer's life as she marches toward her inevitable death at the hands of her abuser. But it also spends some time with the FBI, setting up Special Agent Dale Cooper's interest in the case and teasing the supernatural connections. Now, when this movie was released in 1992, it was not well received. Critics dismissed it, and even many Twin Peaks fans hated how this movie stripped away the small-town quirkiness from the TV show, leaving this film as a raw, unflinching look at a girl who's been traumatized and damaged throughout her life and ultimately let down by those closest to her. Now, by the time we catch up to Laura in this film, she's given up on trying to live a happy life, and she's resigned herself to her torture by this entity named Bob. Now, prequels, they're tough to pull off because the audience already knows the ending, but Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me is so devastating because Laura's fate turned out to be so much more heart-wrenching than I think anyone ever imagined. Moving on to 1993. Now, this was a pretty great year for everyone. Stephen King fans are still feasting with The Dark Half, Tommyknockers, and Needful Things. And the Leprechaun franchise also kicked off. Jason Went to Hell, and I just love Abel Ferrara's take on Body Snatchers. Now, Jurassic Park is the obvious choice for this year since it's without question my favorite movie of the year, but I'm leaning on Letterboxd for these genre classifications. They say Jurassic Park's a sci-fi adventure film, so that leads me to a very different favorite horror movie of the year, Return of the Living Dead Part 3. Return of the Living Dead 3 was directed by Brian Yuzna, who's got a distinct style of his own that I'd call equal parts entertaining and disturbing. Now, this is also an extremely rare example of a horror romance film. And this one follows Kurt and Julie as they try to keep their love alive, even though Julie's totally dead. And this might even be the first zombie romance film, but I'm sure somebody will correct me on that if I'm wrong. Anyway, this movie follows in the footsteps of the first 2 Return of the Living Dead movies. This time, the government is actively experimenting with that crazy chemical trioxin and reanimating corpses that can't be killed with a simple bullet to the head. And Kurt's dad, he's the main military man behind this research, so when Kurt accidentally kills his girlfriend in a motorcycle accident, he thinks bringing her back using the chemicals a great idea. What he doesn't know is that these reanimated corpses are consumed with hunger for live human brains, and the only thing that can temporarily subdue that hunger is physical pain. So, in an effort to override her urge to kill and eat her own boyfriend, Julie starts piercing herself with pieces of metal and shards of glass, resulting in a very gnarly new look. Now, these two might be destined for tragedy, but there's a ton of zombie insanity in this movie, and things get increasingly wild as this zombie horde grows.
How could you eat that? That man!
It's your fault!
Moving on to 1994, and there were some big budget horror releases that year like Interview with the Vampire, Wolf, and Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. Freddy is back already with Wes Craven's New Nightmare, which might actually be my second favorite Freddy film after the original Nightmare on Elm Street. But it's my favorite director who made my favorite horror movie of 1994, so let's get into the cosmic horror that is In the Mouth of Madness. John Carpenter is best known for his 80s output, but even though his 90s films are more of a mixed bag, In the Mouth of Madness is just classic Carpenter that showed this master of horror could still operate at the top of his game. Now, I've said it before, but this might be the most Lovecraftian horror film ever made that isn't actually based on a Lovecraft story. And this movie is anchored by Sam Neill as John Trent, an investigator who's hired to track down the missing horror novelist Sutter Kane. And Trent's investigations lead him and his associate to a town that shouldn't exist called Hobbs End, and that's just the beginning of their descent into insanity. Now, what these two find defies explanation, and the more time they spend in Hobbs End, the more it's clear that this whole place is under the spell of Sutter Kane. Eventually, the townsfolk even start mutating into otherworldly creatures. In the Mouth of Madness contains probably the most confusing and surreal sequences in any John Carpenter movie, as John Trent makes his way back from Hobbs End into a reality that he barely recognizes. Because it turns out that while he's been looking for Sutter Kane, the evil author has been busy getting his new novel out into the real world, and anyone that reads it loses their minds. So society is literally crumbling as the cult of Sutter Kane grows to consume the entire world. And speaking of cults, I know they've got a bad rap, but don't be afraid to hit that subscribe button to join the cinema cult. You've got my word. I'd never try to use my YouTube channel to take over the world.
Do you read Sutter Kane?
Moving on to 1995, there aren't a ton of big hits, but there are a bunch of movies I really dig from that year, including Species, Demon Knight, and Castle Freak. But my favorite is a horror crime thriller that I think more people need to see called Mute Witness. Mute Witness is my dark horse pick on this list, and I actually only caught up with this movie last year. I was kicking myself for not checking it out sooner though, because there's a lot to love about this movie, starting with its unique setting, because this movie was shot almost entirely on location in Moscow not long after the fall of communism, resulting in some pretty unique difficulties for this production crew who had to pay off both custom officials and Russian mobsters just to get access to their own equipment and make this thing. Now, this was also another example of a 90s horror movie doing the meta thing, since this movie is set around the production of a low-budget slasher film. And the story revolves around Billy, a mute special effects artist who gets locked in the studio after hours and then stumbles upon some of these Russian filmmakers shooting a real-life snuff film on the set. And the chase that results is one of my all-time favorite cat and mouse sequences of any film, and it had me on the edge of my seat rooting for Billy to somehow find a way out of this labyrinth of a movie studio to find some help. And she does eventually escape the studio, but she and her friends, they're still stuck in Russia in very unfamiliar territory, surrounded by guys who may or may not be part of this whole snuff film conspiracy. It's a tense as hell story that's sure to please fans of both slashers and thrillers.
Hello?
Hello, intruder.
I don't understand, sorry.
Moving on to 1996, and it was a great year if you like to have a good time with your horror films, with releases like The Frighteners, The Craft, Tales from the Crypt, Bordello of Blood, and Head of the Family. Wes Craven also rejuvenated the slasher subgenre with Scream, which would absolutely be most folks' picks for their favorite movie of the year, but I gotta go with From Dusk Till Dawn. Now listen, I can't deny Scream's place in horror history, and I love that movie too. Just not as much as I love From Dusk Till Dawn. Now this is a movie that starts out as a Tarantino-style crime thriller, and then quickly turns into a hyper-violent vampire movie with some of the most insane and gooey special effects of the decade. How could you not love that? And for anyone unfamiliar, this movie follows the Gecko brothers. They're two criminals trying to make their way to freedom in Mexico who kidnap a preacher and his family along the way. And they all make it to Mexico just fine, but well, they chose the wrong bar to stop at. And no, it's not because that kid's too young to be in a strip joint. It's because this is actually a vampire den, and these travelers are the next meal on the menu. And this is one of those films that, for me personally, gets everything right. I love siege films in general, and the vampire twist in From Dusk Till Dawn works perfectly. You've also got a cast loaded with recognizable faces, and they all seem to be having a great time leaning into the insanity that is the back half of this movie. The creature designs are absolutely out of control, and these vampires look truly demonic when they transform. Seriously, the vampires versus bar patrons battle might be the best bar fight scene since Patrick Swayze was kicking ass in Roadhouse. It's a must-see.
What were they, psychos? Or?
They look like psychos? Is that what they look like? They were vampires.
Moving on to 1997, and this is a year filled with movies I really dig from all over the horror spectrum. I Know What You Did Last Summer and Scream 2 are definitely the best known films of the year, but 97 also has movies like Wishmaster, Cube, Mimic, and The Relic. And then of course there's my favorite of the year, Event Horizon. Here's a couple of hot takes. Paul W.S. Anderson didn't make a bad movie in the 90s, and I'm actually looking forward to seeing his upcoming House of the Dead movie. But I don't think there's any way he's gonna top Event Horizon. As a director, I like Paul W.S. Anderson a lot more than most other folks, and this movie, it's absolutely my favorite of his. Now, I was lucky enough to see this one in theaters, and it scared the hell out of a young teenage me, and I really had no idea that apparently people didn't like this movie at the time. But I'm here just to remind them that they were wrong, and this cosmic horror in space film is still effective almost 30 years later. Once again, we've got Sam Neill making an appearance on this list as Dr. Weir, the designer of the Event Horizon, the ship that disappeared years ago and recently reappeared on the outskirts of the solar system. The Dr. Weir is accompanying a rescue crew to determine just what happened to this missing ship. As it turns out, this thing has literally been to hell, and it's brought back a little bit of that hell with it. And I see a lot of fans pining for the mythical missing footage of what happened on that ship in the other dimension, but I've always thought the few moments they show in the theatrical cut are more than enough to get the idea across, and really, it makes Lawrence Fishburne's reaction to the situation absolutely perfect.
We're leaving.
Moving on to 1998, and the variety's still there, but not so much with the quality. You've got an almost shot-for-shot remake of Psycho, John Carpenter's Uneven Vampires, and an early example of found footage with The Last Broadcast, not to mention Bride of Chucky and Halloween H2O, showing those franchises still had something left in the tank, even if they weren't as great as they used to be. But if you want a great horror movie from 1998, your best bet's to look across the Pacific, because I'm going with Ringu. Truthfully, it's a little weird picking Ringu as my choice for 1998 since this movie took like 5 years to get a release in the US, but it's also hard to overstate what a breath of fresh air the J-horror invasion of the early 2000s was. And this is probably the most famous example of that era of horror, and it's for good reason. This is a really well done supernatural Japanese folk horror movie filled with tension and atmosphere that's still scary, even if you're not familiar with all its underlying themes. This film follows a journalist investigating the deaths of her niece and her 3 teenage friends, who all died exactly 7 days after watching a mysterious videotape. When this investigator gets her hands on a copy of the tape and watches it herself, well, she gets a call informing her that she's gonna be dead in a week too. Now, if that's not bad enough, she left the tape lying around and her son watched it, so well, now they're both doomed if she can't solve the mystery before the week runs out. This film is filled with incredible imagery, particularly the shots of the young ghostly girl emerging first from her well and then through the TV to fulfill this deathly curse. And I also love this movie leaves it up to our imaginations as to why all these victims have such horrified looks on their faces, because we never actually see those deaths. Now, in my mind, that mystery makes the whole situation so much more frightening. Okay, moving on to the final year of the decade, and 1999 turned out to be an extremely difficult year to choose a favorite. Now, I could stick with a Japanese horror and go with Audition. The Blair Witch Project is still one of the best times I've ever had in a movie theater. Idle Hands is just straight up fun. And Ravenous, well, that's just my kind of weird. But you know what? I started this list with a fun as hell creature feature in Tremors, and I'm going to end this list with a fun as hell creature feature in Deep Blue Sea. Look, I told you at the top of this thing that my taste can be questionable, and I just freaking love this movie. Deep Blue Sea, it's not the kind of film that's gonna leave you reeling or questioning your existence. In fact, it's not gonna challenge you at all, because this is a movie that exists to entertain sickos like me that enjoy watching super intelligent sharks systematically taking apart a research facility and hunting down all the humans inside, one floor at a time. Now, Deep Blue Sea was directed by Rennie Harlin, and I'd be the first to admit that calling his filmography uneven would be an understatement. But this is the sort of film that's right up his alley, and he really knows how to shoot action scenes effectively, which is exactly what this movie needs. You've also got Thomas Jane anchoring this cast as the loner shark wrangler who everyone is now relying on to get them out of this situation. This is yet another movie on this list I had the pleasure of seeing in theaters, and let me tell you, when Samuel Jackson got gobbled up mid-speech, we all just about lost our minds. The timing of that death came out of nowhere, and I think really enhances the whole movie going forward, because we were all waiting for the next shark attack to come out of nowhere. It's just an absolutely fantastic scene that really makes me miss seeing movies like this in a packed house.
Are you sure it was just 3 sharks? Yeah.
So there it is, my favorite horror movie from each year of the 1990s, and if there's not at least one movie on this list for you, well, then I don't know what kind of horror you're into, because the 90s really did have something for pretty much everyone, and I think this list proves that, even if horror wasn't as mainstream as it had been in the 1980s. Now, speaking of the 1980s, make sure you like and subscribe, because I'm coming back next time with my favorite horror movie from each year of that decade, and I can tell you right now, I'm gonna have to make some extremely difficult choices with that one, and you're not gonna wanna miss it. As far as the 90s are concerned, well, let me know your favorite picks of the decade down below if I missed yours, and feel free to let me know if you think I'm out of my mind with some of these choices. In the meantime, if you're interested in checking out my favorite horror films from the 2000s, well, you can find that video right here. But that's it for today. I'm CT Reese. Thanks for hanging out with me, and keep watching weird movies. I know I will.